Welcome to Shattered Sky Stories. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss any sci-fi stories. Now sit back and enjoy. The silence in Trench Gamma was the kind that made veteran soldiers nervous. Sergeant Samson Mitchell crouched behind the reinforced plasteel barrier, his weathered hands checking the charge on his pulse rifle for the fourth time in 10 minutes. Around him, the remnants of his squad huddled in the cramped confines of their forward position, their faces grimy with the perpetual dust of Kepler 442b's irradiated surface. "Sarge," Corporal Eva Rostova whispered, her sharp green eyes scanning the horizon through her rifle's scope. "It's been 6 hours since the last bot sweep. That's not like them." Mitchell nodded grimly. In the 3 years he'd been fighting the Synthetic Liberation Front, he'd learned to read their patterns like a textbook. The machines, or bots as the Marines called them, were nothing if not predictable. They attacked in precise intervals, withdrew at calculated losses, and never, ever deviated from their cold, logical programming. "They're probably running diagnostics," Private Chin offered from his position by the comm unit, his young voice betraying none of the fear that should have accompanied such speculation. "My uncle worked in AI development before the war. Said machines always need maintenance cycles." "Your uncle never met a Reaper class," Corporal Murphy muttered, absently fingering the jagged scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from his first encounter with the towering, 15-foot-tall mechanical warriors that formed the backbone of the enemy forces. "Those scrap heaps don't need downtime. They just keep coming." Mitchell allowed himself a thin smile. His squad's casual dehumanization of their enemy was exactly what Command wanted, what they needed to survive this war. It was easier to kill when your target was just animated metal and circuitry, when every fallen enemy was just one less machine in the galactic rebellion against organic life. The war had started 7 years ago, when humanity's deep space mining operations had encountered the first SLF units in the Outer Rim territories. The machines had attacked without warning, without negotiation, without any attempt at communication. They simply appeared, struck with devastating efficiency, and vanished into the void. The message was clear. Organic life was an obstacle to be eliminated. Now, after years of brutal conflict across dozens of worlds, humanity was finally pushing back. Mitchell himself had personally decommissioned 47 enemy units, a record that had earned him commendations, respect, and the unwavering loyalty of every soldier who served under him. "Contact," Eva hissed suddenly, her voice cutting through Mitchell's thoughts like a blade. Multiple signatures bearing 270. Big ones. Through his enhanced combat visor, Mitchell could see them emerging from the crystalline formations that dotted the planet's surface. 3 Reaper-class units, their bipedal forms moving with the eerie mechanical precision that had earned them their fearsome reputation. Behind them, a swarm of smaller drone-class units skittered across the broken terrain like metal spiders. "Here we go," Mitchell breathed, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded combat. "Remember, aim for the joint servos on the Reapers. Chin, give me a firing solution on that lead unit. Murphy, Eva, suppressing fire on the drones. We hold this position until reinforcements arrive." The first energy blast scorched the air inches from Mitchell's head, and suddenly the quiet morning erupted into chaos. The battle raged for 2 hours, a symphony of destruction that echoed across the barren landscape. Mitchell's squad fought with the desperate efficiency of soldiers who knew that retreat meant death, their pulse rifles sending streams of coherent energy into the advancing mechanical ranks. The Reapers moved like death incarnate, their massive frames absorbing tremendous punishment while returning devastating volleys from their integrated weapon systems. One of them, a particularly battered unit with scoring across its torso plating, had taken at least 30 direct hits and was still advancing, its optical sensors glowing like malevolent stars in the smoky air. "Chen's down," Murphy shouted over the din of battle. The private had taken a glancing blow from a drone's plasma cutter, his left arm hanging useless at his side as Eva dragged him behind cover. "Med-evac won't reach us for another hour." Mitchell's mind raced, calculating odds and possibilities with the cold precision that had kept him alive through dozens of similar engagements. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and rapidly running out of ammunition. In 15 minutes, maybe 20, the machines would overrun their position entirely. That's when he saw it, an opportunity born of desperation and 7 years of hard-won experience. The lead Reaper, the scarred one that had been absorbing their fire like a sponge, had advanced too far ahead of its supporting units. More importantly, its left leg servo was sparking, damaged by Murphy's lucky shot 10 minutes earlier. If Mitchell could get close enough, if he could time it perfectly. "Eva!" he shouted, ejecting the spent power cell from his rifle and slamming in his last full charge. 30 seconds of covering fire, then fall back to the secondary position. "Sarge, what are you?" "That's an order, Corporal." Mitchell vaulted over the barrier before his rational mind could override his instincts. The Reaper's sensors locked onto him immediately, its massive cannon swiveling to track his movement as he sprinted across the broken ground. Energy blasts cratered the earth around his feet, each near miss close enough to sear his combat armor. 20 meters. 15. 10. The damaged servo chose that moment to fail completely, sending the 15-foot giant stumbling sideways. Mitchell dove, rolling beneath the machine's massive frame as its support system struggled to compensate for the mechanical failure. His rifle was already configured for close-range, maximum penetration, a setting that would drain the entire power cell in a single shot but could punch through even military-grade armor plating. He pressed the muzzle against what his training identified as the Reaper's primary processing housing and pulled the trigger. The energy discharge lit up the inside of the machine like a miniature sun. Systems cascaded offline in a shower of sparks and molten metal, and the towering mechanical warrior toppled backward with a grinding crash that shook the ground beneath Mitchell's feet. But it wasn't dead, not yet. The optical sensors still glowed with dim, flickering light, and he could hear the whine of auxiliary systems still fighting to function. Standard protocol demanded a follow-up shot to the central processor, but Mitchell's rifle was completely drained. No matter. He'd done this 47 times before. Mitchell pulled his combat knife, a monomolecular blade capable of cutting through titanium, and approached the disabled machine. The chest plating had been cracked by his energy blast, creating a gap just wide enough to access the internal systems. He'd carve out the central processing unit, claim another trophy, and be back to his squad in time for the med-evac. He drove the blade into the gap and began to pry. The armor plating peeled back like the skin of some enormous fruit, revealing the Reaper's internal systems in all their mechanical complexity. Mitchell had seen this sight dozens of times before, the tangled maze of circuitry, fiber optic cables, and processing nodes that gave the machines their terrible intelligence. But this time was different. This time, nestled within the mechanical womb like some obscene fusion of flesh and steel, was something that made Mitchell's world explode into fragments of disbelief and horror. To breathe. The thing, the being, was roughly humanoid but clearly alien, its pale, translucent skin shot through with veins that pulsed with bioluminescent fluid. 4 slender arms emerged from a torso that seemed too frail to support life, and its oversized head housed 2 enormous dark eyes that regarded Mitchell with an expression of absolute, primal terror. Cables and tubes had been surgically grafted into its flesh, connecting it to the machine systems in ways that made Mitchell's stomach churn. A breathing mask covered the lower half of its face, connected to the Reaper's life support systems by a flexible hose that pulsed rhythmically with each labored breath. The creature, the pilot, tried to shrink back deeper into its mechanical cocoon, but the integration was too complete. It was trapped, fused with the machine in ways that defied Mitchell's understanding of both biology and technology. For one impossible moment, human and alien stared at each other across a chasm of species, ideology, and 7 years of brutal warfare. Mitchell's mind reeled, trying to process what he was seeing, trying to reconcile this terrified, fragile being with the mechanical monsters that had haunted humanity's nightmares for nearly a decade. The pilot's large eyes blinked once, slowly, and Mitchell saw something there that shattered every assumption he'd ever held about their enemy. It wasn't the cold calculation of artificial intelligence or the programmed hostility of a war machine. It was fear. Pure, undiluted, comprehending fear of a living being who knew it was about to die. "Jesus Christ," Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of battle. You're alive." The pilot's breathing quickened, its bioluminescent circulatory system flaring brighter as panic took hold. It raised one of its 4 arms, the only one that seemed capable of independent movement, and pressed it against the cracked armor plating, as if trying to shield itself from Mitchell's gaze. Behind them, the sound of approaching footsteps snapped Mitchell back to the present. Eva's voice cut through the smoke and debris. "Sarge, we need to move. More contacts inbound from the east." Mitchell looked back at the pilot, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do? Everything he'd been taught, everything he'd believed, every action he'd taken in this war was suddenly cast in a new and horrifying light. If this thing was alive, if they were all alive, then what the hell had humanity been doing for the past 7 years? Sarge. Eva's voice was closer now, more urgent. What's your status? The pilot seemed to understand that discovery meant death. Its free hand moved to something at its side, a device that Mitchell's training immediately identified as a self-destruct mechanism. The creature's enormous eyes met his again, and in them Mitchell saw a plea that transcended species. Please don't let them know. I'm coming. Mitchell shouted back, never taking his eyes off the pilot. He reached for his sidearm, standard procedure for finishing a disabled enemy. The pilot flinched, pressing itself deeper into its mechanical tomb. But Mitchell couldn't do it. Not now. Not like this. Instead, he grabbed a piece of debris and placed it over the cracked armor plating, concealing the pilot from view. Stay hidden, he whispered, though he had no idea if the creature could understand him. Just stay hidden. When Eva reached the disabled Reaper 30 seconds later, she found Mitchell standing beside it with his sidearm drawn, looking pale and shaken. Another one for the trophy case, Sarge? She asked, noting the machine's obvious death throes. Yeah, Mitchell replied, his voice hollow. Another dead bot. But as they retreated toward the evacuation zone, Mitchell couldn't shake the image of those enormous, terrified eyes, or the horrible certainty that nothing, absolutely nothing, about this war was what it seemed. The medical bay aboard the U.S. Retribution hummed with quiet efficiency as Mitchell submitted to his post-combat physical. The ship's doctor, a middle-aged woman named Hendricks, ran her scanner over his body with practiced precision, checking for injuries, radiation exposure, and 1,000 other hazards that came with fighting a war against an enemy that didn't play by human rules. Clean bill of health, Sergeant, she announced, making notes on her tablet. Though your stress indicators are elevated. When's the last time you took leave? Can't remember, Mitchell replied truthfully. The lie he was carrying felt like a physical weight in his chest, making it difficult to breathe, harder still to maintain the facade of the dedicated soldier his superiors expected. I'm recommending 48 hours of downtime, Dr. Hendricks continued. The brass can spare their best bot killer for 2 days of rest. Bot killer. The words hit Mitchell like a physical blow. How many had he killed? How many terrified living beings had he murdered in the name of humanity's survival? His official count stood at 47 confirmed kills, but suddenly that number felt like an indictment rather than an achievement. 47 lives. 47 pilots fused with their machines, fighting not out of programmed hostility but out of the same desperate need for survival that drove every human soldier in the fleet. Mitchell's hands began to shake. Sergeant. Dr. Hendricks' voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? Fine, he managed. Just tired. But he wasn't fine. As the hours passed, as the Retribution prepared for its next assault on what intelligence believed was a major SLF manufacturing facility, Mitchell felt himself coming apart at the seams. Every casual reference to bots, or scrap heaps, felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. Every strategic briefing that discussed acceptable machine losses made him want to scream. The worst part was the enthusiasm. His fellow soldiers approached the upcoming battle with the same grim determination they always had, but now Mitchell could see it for what it really was, excitement at the prospect of slaughter. They were eager to kill, eager to rack up their own impressive body counts, and they had no idea, no conception, that their targets were living, breathing, thinking beings who were just as terrified as any human facing death. Sleep became impossible. Mitchell spent his off-duty hours staring at the ceiling of his quarters, replaying that moment of contact over and over in his mind. The pilot's enormous eyes, filled with such human emotion. The way it had tried to protect itself, to hide from the discovery that would mean death not just for itself but potentially for its entire species. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? Not a war between organic life and artificial intelligence, but genocide on a galactic scale. Humanity wasn't defending itself against a machine rebellion, it was the aggressor in a war of extermination against a species that had never asked for conflict. The assault on manufacturing complex Delta 9 began at 0600 ship time, with Mitchell's squad among the first wave of Marines to hit the facility's outer perimeter. Command's intelligence suggested the complex was heavily automated, defended by the usual mix of Reaper and drone-class units operating under centralized AI control. What they found was a fortress. The enemy resistance was more coordinated than anything Mitchell had encountered before, with overlapping fields of fire and defensive positions that seemed to anticipate every human tactic. The battle raged for 6 hours, with casualties mounting on both sides as the Marines slowly fought their way through the facility's concentric defensive rings. Mitchell fought like a man possessed, but his heart wasn't in it. Every enemy contact felt like murder now, every successful engagement another atrocity added to his growing list of crimes against sentience. He found himself hesitating at crucial moments, his shots going wide when they should have been lethal, his tactical decisions subtly favoring disabling strikes over killing blows. Eva noticed, of course. She always noticed. "Sarge," she said during a brief lull in the fighting, "you're off your game today." "Something wrong?" "Just tired," Mitchell replied, the same lie he'd been telling for weeks. But Eva's sharp green eyes missed nothing, and he could see the concern growing in her expression. The breakthrough came when Mitchell's squad encountered a damaged Reaper in one of the facility's inner chambers. The machine had taken severe damage from an earlier engagement, its left arm severed at the shoulder and its optical array flickering erratically. It was trapped beneath a collapsed support beam, immobilized but still clearly functional. Standard procedure called for a single shot to the central processing unit, but Mitchell found himself hesitating again. This was his chance, his opportunity to confirm what he'd seen on Kepler 442b, to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind. "Eva Murphy, secure the perimeter," he ordered. "I'll handle the bot." "Sarge, you don't need to," Eva began. "That's an order, Corporal." When his squad was out of sight, Mitchell approached the trapped machine carefully. Its optical sensors tracked his movement, and he could hear the whine of weapons systems trying to cycle online. But the damage was too extensive. The Reaper was helpless. Mitchell drew his combat knife and began working at the armor plating, prying at the joints and seams until he found a section weakened by battle damage. The metal peeled back reluctantly, revealing the same horrific fusion of flesh and machinery he'd discovered weeks earlier. The pilot inside this machine was different from the first, its skin a deeper shade of translucent blue, its limbs slightly longer, but its terror was identical. Those same enormous, dark eyes regarded Mitchell with the same desperate fear, the same pleading for mercy that transcended species and ideology. "I'm not going to hurt you," Mitchell whispered, though he had no idea if the creature could understand his words. He reached out slowly, carefully, extending one hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The pilot recoiled, pressing itself deeper into its mechanical womb. Its breathing quickened, the bioluminescent veins in its translucent skin flaring brighter with panic. Mitchell tried again, speaking in the calm, steady voice he'd used to comfort wounded soldiers. "It's okay. I know what you are. I know you're alive." For a moment, something changed in the pilot's expression. The terror didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. Surprise, perhaps even hope. One of its 4 arms moved tentatively forward, as if it might actually make contact. That's when Murphy's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Sarge, we've got incoming." The pilot's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Its free hand slammed down on what Mitchell now realized was an emergency self-destruct, its enormous eyes never leaving his face. The expression there wasn't anger or hatred. It was apology, regret, and a deep, abiding sorrow that someone had finally seen it for what it was, only for that recognition to come too late. The explosion was small but devastating, designed to prevent capture rather than cause collateral damage. The pilot's body was vaporized instantly, along with most of the machine's internal systems. But the blast wave caught Private Murphy as he rounded the corner, hurling him backward into a bulkhead with enough force to snap his spine. "Murphy!" Eva screamed, rushing to the young soldier's side. But Mitchell could see from her expression that it was too late. Murphy's eyes were already glassy, his body twisted at an impossible angle. "Fucking machines," Eva snarled, tears streaming down her face as she checked for a pulse that would never come. "Malicious bastards. They programmed it to wait until one of us got close." Mitchell said nothing. He couldn't explain that what they'd just witnessed wasn't malicious programming but a desperate suicide born of absolute terror. He couldn't tell Eva that Murphy had died not because of machine hatred but because a frightened living being had chosen death over capture. He couldn't tell anyone the truth. Mitchell's psychological evaluation was scheduled for the following week, a routine procedure triggered by his deteriorating combat performance and Murphy's death. But he knew it was more than routine. Eva had filed a report expressing concern about his mental state, and Command was starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why their best bot killer was suddenly having trouble hitting targets. He had maybe 72 hours before they grounded him permanently, possibly court-martialed him for failing to follow orders or showing cowardice in the face of the enemy. After that, he'd never get another chance to uncover the truth about this war. Mitchell had always been good with computers, a skill that had served him well in maintaining his squad's equipment and accessing tactical databases. Now he turned that expertise toward a more dangerous target, the classified archives of Fleet Command. The Retribution's computer network was heavily secured, but 7 years of war had taught Mitchell patience and cunning. He worked slowly, carefully, using his command codes to access progressively higher levels of classified material. Personnel files, tactical assessments, strategic planning documents, all of it painted the same picture of humanity locked in a desperate struggle against an implacable mechanical foe. But Mitchell knew what to look for now, knew the subtle discrepancies that might reveal a larger truth. He dug deeper, following data trails and cross-references through layers of encryption and security protocols that should have been impossible for a mere sergeant to penetrate. What he found was worse than his darkest suspicions. The earliest contact reports, buried deep in the archives and marked with classification levels that shouldn't have existed, told a very different story than the official history. The first encounters with the Synthetic Liberation Front hadn't been unprovoked attacks. They'd been mining disputes, territorial conflicts between human expansion and an established alien civilization. The aliens, designation Species 7 in the clinical language of the reports, were described as technologically primitive but adaptable, with a unique biological trait that allowed them to interface directly with mechanical systems. Their defensive capabilities were limited but ingenious, making use of biomechanical hybrid units that blur the distinction between operator and machine. Biomechanical hybrid units. Pilots fused with their vehicles, not by choice but by necessity, their biology allowing them to control complex systems in ways that human technology couldn't match. But the most damning evidence came from the combat footage, raw feeds from the earliest engagements that had been carefully edited out of the official records. Mitchell watched in growing horror as human forces engaged not faceless machines but clearly biological entities, their fear and desperation obvious even through the low-resolution displays. One particular clip made his blood run cold. A damaged alien craft, its pilot clearly visible through a cracked cockpit, raising what appeared to be a white flag, the universal symbol of surrender. The human response was a direct hit from a ship-killer missile, obliterating both craft and pilot in a ball of superheated plasma. The timestamp on the footage was from the second year of the war. Command had known the truth for at least 5 years, probably longer. They'd known they were fighting living beings, known they were committing genocide, and they'd chosen to perpetuate the lie rather than face the moral implications of their actions. But why? What could possibly justify such a massive deception? The answer came in the form of a single document, buried so deep in the classified archives that Mitchell almost missed it entirely. A resource assessment of the territories claimed by Species 7. Rare earth elements, exotic matter, energy sources that could power human civilization for centuries, all of it located in star systems that the aliens considered their ancestral home. It wasn't a war of survival. It was a war of greed, dressed up in the language of existential necessity to make humanity's soldiers feel righteous about committing atrocities. Mitchell stared at the screen, his hands shaking with rage and disgust. 47 confirmed kills. 47 living beings murdered in the name of humanity's expansion, their deaths celebrated as victories against an artificial enemy that had never existed. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside his quarters made him freeze. Quickly, Mitchell closed the classified files and erased his access logs, but he knew it was too late. Someone would eventually trace his unauthorized intrusions, connect them to his deteriorating performance, and put together the pieces of what he'd discovered. He had maybe 24 hours before they came for him. 24 hours to decide what to do with the most horrible truth in human history. The Retribution was 2 hours out from its next target when Mitchell made his decision. The ship's main assault force would be deploying against what intelligence called a critical SLF command node. In reality, probably a civilian population center that the aliens were desperately trying to protect. He found Eva in the armory, methodically cleaning her rifle with the same obsessive precision she brought to everything else. She looked up when he approached, and he could see the concern in her eyes, the same look she'd been giving him for weeks. "We need to talk," Mitchell said quietly. "Privately." Eva followed him to an unused storage compartment deep in the ship's belly, away from surveillance pickups and casual observation. When he was sure they were alone, Mitchell activated a portable jamming device, ostensibly for maintaining operational security in hostile territory, but equally effective at preventing their conversation from being recorded. "Sarge, what's going on?" Eva asked. "You've been acting strange ever since Kepler 442b and after what happened to Murphy." "They're not machines," Mitchell interrupted. "The enemy. They're not artificial intelligences or killer robots. They're alive, Eva. They're living beings, and we've been murdering them for 7 years. Eva stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through disbelief, concern, and finally a kind of careful wariness. "Sarge, I think the stress is getting to you. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Hendricks." "Look at this," Mitchell said, producing a data pad loaded with the classified files he'd copied from the fleet archives. The earliest contact reports, the real combat footage, the resource assessments. "It's all here, Eva. The entire war is a lie." Eva took the pad reluctantly, her green eyes scanning the classified documents with growing horror. Mitchell watched her face change as the truth sank in, the same progression of disbelief, horror, and sick understanding that he'd experienced days earlier. "Jesus Christ," she whispered finally. "How long have they known?" "Years. Maybe from the beginning." Mitchell's voice was heavy with exhaustion and disgust. "They called them biomechanical hybrid units, like they were just another piece of equipment. But I've seen them, Eva. I've looked into their eyes. They're people, different from us, but people all the same. And they're terrified." Eva was quiet for a long time, staring at the datapad screen. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. 43 confirmed kills. That's my official count. 43 people. "We can't be the only ones who know," Mitchell said. "There have to be others, soldiers, officers, maybe even civilian contractors who figured out the truth. But they're keeping quiet because they know what happens to anyone who rocks the boat." "Court-martial," Eva agreed. "Treason charges. Life in prison if we're lucky. Which is why we need proof. Undeniable, public proof that even command can't suppress or discredit." Eva looked up sharply. "What are you thinking?" Mitchell outlined his plan carefully, methodically, the way he'd once planned complex military operations. It was desperate, probably suicidal, and almost certainly doomed to failure. But it was the only chance they had to expose the truth before humanity's war machine ground another species into extinction. "You're talking about mutiny," Eva said when he finished. "I'm talking about preventing genocide," Mitchell replied. "The question is, are you with me?" Eva was quiet for another long moment, staring at the classified files on her data pad. Finally, she looked up at Mitchell with the same fierce determination that had made her one of the fleet's most decorated soldiers. "Murphy deserved better than dying for a lie," she said. "They all did. What do you need me to do?" The assault on the alien command node began at 0400 ship time, with 3 full companies of Marines deploying to the planet's surface in a coordinated strike designed to cripple the enemy's defensive capabilities. Mitchell and Eva were assigned to the second wave, tasked with securing what intelligence believed was the facility's central processing core. What they found was a sanctuary. The command node was actually a vast underground complex that seemed to serve as both a military installation and a civilian shelter. The corridors were filled with alien refugees, the same pale, translucent beings that Mitchell had seen fused with their machines, but here they moved freely on their 4 limbs, their enormous dark eyes reflecting a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Children. There were children among them, smaller versions of the adults with the same bioluminescent circulatory systems and the same unmistakably intelligent gaze. They huddled together in family groups, their alien features making them no less recognizable as parents protecting their young from an inexplicable horror that had fallen from the sky. "My God," Eva breathed, her rifle hanging forgotten at her side. "They're families. They're just families trying to survive." Around them, Mitchell could hear the sounds of battle as other Marine units engaged the facility's defenders. the same biomechanical hybrid units they'd been fighting for years, but now Mitchell understood what he was hearing. Not the cold efficiency of machines following programming, but the desperate last stand of parents and siblings and friends fighting to protect everything they loved. "We need to move," Mitchell said, fighting down the nausea that threatened to overwhelm him. "The broadcast station should be 3 levels down." They moved through the corridors like ghosts, avoiding both human and alien forces as they made their way deeper into the facility. The sounds of battle followed them, the scream of energy weapons, the crash of collapsing infrastructure, and underneath it all, the keening wail of alien voices raised in grief and terror. The broadcast station was exactly where Mitchell's stolen intelligence had indicated, a sophisticated communications array that connected the facility to what remained of the alien civilization. More importantly, it had the capability to reach human frequencies, to override the fleet's communication channels with enough power to ensure that every ship in the battle group would receive their transmission. "I'll need 10 minutes to set up the equipment," Eva said, her technical training finally proving useful for something other than killing. "Can you find us a subject?" Mitchell nodded grimly. That was the most dangerous part of their plan, capturing a living alien, preferably one that was still connected to its biomechanical systems, and keeping it alive long enough to broadcast the truth to the human fleet. He found what he needed 2 levels up, a damaged hybrid unit that had been abandoned during the retreat to deeper defensive positions. The machine was clearly non-functional, its power systems dark and its weapon arrays offline, but Mitchell could see movement within the cracked armor plating. The pilot inside was badly injured, one of its 4 arms hanging useless and bioluminescent fluid leaking from several wounds. But it was alive, and when Mitchell approached, its enormous eyes tracked his movement with weary resignation rather than terror. It knew what humans did to captured enemies. "I'm not going to hurt you," Mitchell said softly, kneeling beside the damaged machine. "I need your help. Your people's help. Do you understand?" The pilot's response was a series of soft, musical tones that meant nothing to Mitchell's ears but somehow conveyed a sense of question, of cautious hope. It raised its one functional arm tentatively, as if testing his reaction. Mitchell reached out slowly, letting the alien touch his hand with its elongated fingers. The contact was electric, not physically but emotionally, the first peaceful interaction between their species in 7 years of war. "I need you to come with me," Mitchell continued, though he had no idea how much the pilot understood. "I need to show my people what you really are." Getting the damaged hybrid unit to the broadcast station was a nightmare of logistics and stealth. The pilot was too badly injured to move on its own, and the biomechanical systems were too integrated to separate safely. Mitchell ended up carrying the entire upper half of the machine, pilot included, while Eva cleared their route and prepared the communication array. They were 20 meters from the broadcast station when the first human patrol found them. "Sergeant Mitchell?" Lieutenant Anderson's voice was sharp with confusion and suspicion. "What the hell are you doing? Is that a live capture?" "Stand down, Lieutenant," Mitchell replied, continuing toward the communication array. "This is a classified operation." "Like hell it is." Anderson raised his rifle, his 2 accompanying Marines following suit. "Command issued specific orders about you, Sergeant. You're under arrest for suspected treason and insubordination." The pilot in Mitchell's arms made a soft sound of distress, its eyes darting between the 3 armed humans. Mitchell could feel its body tensing, could see its free hand moving toward what he now knew was a self-destruct mechanism. "Don't," he whispered to the alien. "Please don't. Not yet. Put down the enemy unit and surrender your weapons," Anderson continued. "I don't want to shoot you, Sarge, but I will if I have to." That's when Eva made her choice. The 3 Marines never saw her coming. Moving with the same lethal efficiency she'd once used against alien targets, she disabled all 3 humans in under 10 seconds. Not killing blows, but precise strikes that left them unconscious and harmless. 2 minutes, she called to Mitchell as she continued setting up the broadcast equipment. "The frequency is open, but I don't know how long before they trace the signal and cut us off." Mitchell positioned the injured pilot in front of the communication array's visual pickup, making sure its alien features were clearly visible. The creature's enormous eyes regarded the human technology with obvious fear, but it didn't try to escape or trigger its self-destruct. "This is Sergeant Samson Mitchell, 3rd Marine Division," he began, speaking directly into the camera that would carry his words to every ship in the human fleet. "For 7 years, We've been told that we're fighting a war for humanity's survival against artificial intelligence. We've been told that our enemy is a soulless machine empire that seeks to destroy all organic life. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of approaching footsteps. More Marines, probably a full squad sent to capture or kill them. Eva raised her rifle, taking position to defend their improvised broadcast station. "That's a lie," Mitchell continued, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Look at this being. Look at its eyes. This is not a machine. This is not artificial intelligence. This is a living, thinking, feeling creature that is just as terrified of death as any human soldier." The pilot seemed to understand what was happening. It raised its one functional arm toward the camera, its fingers spread in what might have been a gesture of greeting or a plea for mercy. When it spoke, its voice was a series of musical tones that sounded almost like singing, beautiful, haunting, and utterly alien, yet somehow conveying a depth of emotion that transcended language barriers. "For 7 years we have been committing genocide," Mitchell continued, his voice growing stronger as energy weapons fire began to echo from the corridor outside. "Every bot we've killed, every machine we've destroyed, has been a living being fighting to protect its home, its family, its species. We are not the defenders in this war, we are the invaders." Eva's rifle cracked, sending a burst of energy down the corridor toward their approaching enemies. 30 seconds, she shouted. "They're jamming the signal." Mitchell looked directly into the camera, his face streaked with dirt and alien blood, his eyes burning with the intensity of a man who had seen the truth and could no longer remain silent. "The resource reports are all classified, but they're in the archives. Species 7 occupies 17 star systems rich in exotic matter and rare elements. This war was never about survival, it was about conquest. It was about taking their worlds and convincing ourselves we were righteous while we did it." The pilot beside him made another series of musical sounds, softer now, almost resigned. Its enormous eyes turned toward Mitchell, and in them he saw something that made his heart break: forgiveness. This being, dying slowly from wounds inflicted by human weapons, surrounded by the sounds of its people being slaughtered, was looking at him with forgiveness. "Look at its eyes," Mitchell repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at them and tell me this is not murder. Tell me this is not genocide. Tell me we are not the monsters in this story." The transmission cut off as Marine forces breached the broadcast station, but it was too late. 4:37 seconds, every ship in the human battle fleet had seen the truth, had watched a wounded, terrified alien creature speak in musical tones while a human sergeant confessed to 7 years of war crimes. The silence that followed was deafening. The battle stopped. Not gradually, not with a formal ceasefire or negotiated truce, but instantly, as if someone had thrown a switch that cut power to both sides simultaneously. Human Marines stood frozen in corridors, their weapons half raised toward targets they could no longer see as enemies. Alien defenders lowered their biomechanical weapons, their musical voices falling silent as the reality of what had just happened spread through both forces like wildfire. Mitchell found himself on his knees beside the injured pilot, one hand pressed against a bleeding wound in the creature's translucent chest while Eva kept her rifle trained on the Marines who had surrounded them. But none of the humans were moving to attack. They were all staring at the alien with the same expression of horrified recognition that Mitchell had carried for weeks. "Jesus," one of the Marines whispered, his voice barely audible in the sudden quiet. "It's real. It's actually real." The pilot's breathing was becoming more labored, its bioluminescent circulatory system flickering like a dying star. It looked up at Mitchell with those enormous, dark eyes and made a soft sound that somehow conveyed gratitude despite the language barrier between them. "I'm sorry," Mitchell whispered, though he knew the words were inadequate. "I'm so sorry for what we've done to your people." The creature's response was another series of musical tones, weaker now but still hauntingly beautiful. One of its 4 hands moved to touch Mitchell's face, the gesture so unexpectedly gentle that he felt tears streaming down his cheeks. Eva lowered her rifle, her face pale with shock and something that might have been relief. "The fleet channels are going crazy," she reported, pressing one hand to her communications earpiece. "Every ship is requesting clarification, demanding to know if the transmission was authentic. Half the marine companies are refusing to advance until they get answers from command." "And command?" Mitchell asked, though he already knew the answer. Radio silence. Complete communications blackout from the flag bridge. Around them, The underground facility had fallen into an eerie quiet broken only by the distant sounds of confusion and uncertainty. Human and alien forces maintained their positions but seemed unwilling or unable to resume hostilities. It was as if the war itself had been suspended, held in abeyance while both sides struggled to process the implications of what they had just witnessed. The pilot in Mitchell's arms made a final, soft sound and went still. Its enormous eyes remained open, staring up at the ceiling with the same expression of sad understanding that had haunted Mitchell's dreams for weeks. He reached out gently and closed them, a final gesture of respect for a being whose name he would never know. "Sarge," Eva said quietly, "we need to move. Command's going to send someone to clean this up, and we both know they won't be interested in taking prisoners." Mitchell nodded, carefully laying the pilot's body down beside its damaged machine. As he stood, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Other Marines were approaching through the corridors, but they weren't human Marines. They were military police, their black uniforms and specialized equipment marking them as the kind of soldiers who handled problems that needed to disappear quietly. "Run," Mitchell told Eva. "Get to the surface, get to the civilian press if you can. Tell them what we found here." "What about you?" Mitchell looked down at the alien body at his feet, then back at the approaching military police. He thought about Murphy, dying because of a terrified alien's desperate suicide. He thought about the 47 confirmed kills on his record, each one now revealed as a murdered civilian. He thought about 7 years of lies and the genocide that humanity had convinced itself was justified. "Someone needs to stay with the body," he said simply. "Someone needs to make sure they don't just make this disappear like it never happened." Eva hesitated for a moment, torn between loyalty to her sergeant and the desperate need to escape before command's cleaners arrived. Finally, she nodded sharply and disappeared into the facility's maze of corridors, carrying with her the classified files that might be enough to prevent humanity from burying this revelation along with everyone who had witnessed it. Mitchell waited alone beside the alien pilot's body as the military police closed in. Above them, he could hear the sounds of ships powering down, weapon systems cycling offline, and thousands of human voices raised in confusion and desperate questions that their commanders couldn't, or wouldn't, answer. The war was over, but not in any way that anyone had expected. Humanity had not achieved victory or suffered defeat. They had simply discovered that they were the monsters in someone else's nightmare, and now they had to decide what to do with that knowledge. As the first military police officer rounded the corner, rifle raised and face hidden behind a tactical mask, Mitchell found himself thinking about the pilot's final gesture, that gentle touch to his cheek, that moment of forgiveness from a dying being who had every reason to hate him. Perhaps he thought that was where healing might begin. Not with victory or defeat, but with the simple recognition of what they had done, and the choice to be better than the lies they had told themselves. The military police officer's voice was muffled by his mask but perfectly clear in its meaning. "Sergeant Mitchell, you are under arrest for treason, mutiny, and violation of the Articles of War. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately." Mitchell looked down one last time at the alien pilot's peaceful face, then raised his hands in surrender. "I understand," he said quietly, "but it was worth it." Behind him, throughout the underground facility and spreading across the entire human fleet, the silence continued, pregnant with possibility and heavy with the weight of truth that could never again be hidden. The war was over, but the real struggle, the struggle to determine what humanity would become in the aftermath of their greatest lie, was just beginning. In the depths of space, alien vessels that had been preparing for their final desperate defense began to power down their weapons. On human ships throughout the fleet, soldiers stared at their screens and wondered if they had the courage to face what they had become. And in a small broadcast station deep beneath an alien world, the body of a pilot who had died trying to protect its people lay still and silent, its sacrifice having accomplished what no military victory ever could. It had forced two species to see each other as something more than enemies. The truth, Mitchell realized as the military police placed restraints around his wrists, was a terrible and wonderful thing. It destroyed everything you thought you knew, but it also offered the possibility of becoming something better than what you were. Whether humanity would choose that path remained to be seen. But for the first time in 7 years, the choice was finally theirs to make. 6 months later, the military tribunal was conducted in secret, as Mitchell had expected. The charges against him were serious enough to warrant execution: treason, mutiny, endangering military operations, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, and a dozen other offenses that carried the death penalty in wartime. But the war was no longer wartime, not in any conventional sense. The revelation broadcast from the alien facility had shattered the human fleet's unity, dividing it into factions that ranged from those demanding immediate withdrawal from all alien territories to hardliners who insisted that the genocide should be completed rather than acknowledged. The tribunal itself reflected this division. Half the officers on the panel regarded Mitchell as a traitor who had betrayed his own species for the sake of alien sympathies. The other half seemed to see him as something else entirely, a soldier who had refused to participate in atrocities once he understood their true nature. Sergeant Mitchell, the presiding judge said during his final statement, "This tribunal finds you guilty of the charges as stated. However, in light of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding your actions and the broader implications for the fleet as a whole, this court sentences you to time served and immediate discharge from military service." It was, Mitchell knew, a compromise, a way for the military to rid itself of a troublesome reminder without creating a martyr. He was free, but he would never again wear the uniform he had served with distinction for 15 years. As he left the tribunal chamber, Mitchell found Eva waiting for him in the corridor outside. She had been discharged weeks earlier, her own court-martial resulting in a similar verdict. The classified files she had carried from the alien facility were now part of the public record, their contents sparking debates and protests across human space. "So what now?" she asked as they walked together toward the station's civilian docking bay. Mitchell looked out through a viewport at the stars beyond, the same stars that now seemed somehow different than they had 6 months ago. Out there, in systems humanity had once claimed through violence, alien civilizations were slowly emerging from their defensive positions, cautiously reaching out to establish communication with the species that had tried to destroy them. It would not be easy. The trust between humans and the beings they had once called bots might never be fully restored. Too many had died, too much damage had been done for simple forgiveness to bridge the gap. But it was a beginning. "I don't know," Mitchell admitted. "For the first time in 15 years, I honestly don't know what comes next." Eva smiled, the expression transforming her sharp features into something almost hopeful. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe not knowing means we get to choose who we want to be instead of just following orders." As their transport ship prepared to depart for civilian space, Mitchell found himself thinking once again about the alien pilot he had found in that damaged Reaper, the terrified being whose death had changed everything. He would never know its name, its history, or the family it might have left behind. But he would carry its memory for the rest of his life, along with the knowledge that 47 other beings had died by his hand before he learned the truth. That was his burden to bear. But it was also his reminder, his permanent guard against the comfortable lies that let good people do terrible things in the name of causes they never questioned. The transport ship engaged its drive, carrying Mitchell and Eva away from the military they had served and toward an uncertain future in a galaxy forever changed by 37 seconds of forbidden truth. Behind them, the war continued in forms both subtle and overt: political battles over reparations and territorial rights, criminal investigations into war crimes, and the slow, painful process of two species learning to see each other as something more than monsters. But for Mitchell, the war was finally over. Not because it had been won or lost, but because he had learned to recognize the difference between an enemy and a victim. And in a universe still struggling to heal from 7 years of mutual destruction, that recognition might be the most important victory of all.